Current state of patch 10.9. 10.9 ended up being a pretty large meta shift, probably larger than we intended. Certainly it did hit the goal of making 1-cost 3-star units desirable, but certainly, especially at lower elos, but overall, like, definitely a little much. But it has been a very diverse meta. We have seen pretty much every comp be successful in some way through various means. There are a few that are a little weaker, but yeah, overall in a good spot. Now, here's the big thing. As we announced, patch 10.12 is the mid-set expansion. Patch 10.12 will be a lot of changes. Some champions and traits are going to rotate out. New ones are going to rotate in. And so, because that big change is coming, we are trying to make the next few patches be a little more stable. So 10.10 and 10.11 expect to be smaller patches, trying to keep the meta where it is, but just improved, so that you can kind of go into ranked, end the act on a good spot, not having to deal with any crazy changes. So it's overall a pretty small patch. So, all right, let's jump into it. First off, there is one new galaxy. As you saw me play if you were watching the stream earlier, we are only adding one new galaxy, and it's called Galactic Armory. And the way it works is everybody starts with the same 2 completed items. And so the 2 items cannot be spatula items. They cannot be repeat items. It's just 2 random items, and everyone gets the same ones. So for example, if you watched me earlier, we had a game where we had Chalice and I forget the other item, but let's just say Warmogs. Everyone gets a Chalice and Warmogs. Again, the items can't repeat, so no double Chalice or anything like that. But yeah, it's actually pretty fun because the mind games kind of kick in, where it's like, if you know everyone has Static Shiv, do you build Mystic to counter it, or do you build the the attack speed to use it? So it's pretty fun so far. Okay, system changes. There are 4 system changes we need to talk about. First one is Super Dense Galaxy has been changed. It no longer grants a free Force of Nature at level 5. It now grants a free Force of Nature at stage 3-1. We did agree with the feedback that it was basically forcing you into aggressive leveling. We wanted to make that not the case, open up more playstyles. So now it's just at 3-1 you get Force of Nature. And the way you'll notice is the little 5 is gone from the icon, so woohoo! Here's another quality of life change. If you attempt to use a Nico's help on a champ with no copies left in the bag, you'll actually see an error message now. So no more people hopefully reporting that this is a bug. You'll actually see the error message saying there are no more left. Cool. Reduce the chances of a random full item carousel by a large amount, especially in earlier carousels. Now, a couple notes on this. It says random full item carousels. So, for example, the full item carousel that is a bunch of the underused items didn't lower those chances. That still happens. So before everyone starts memeing and going, I got a full item carousel, it still happened. But we definitely took the random one, which I think was at 4%, and dropped it down to 1%. So it is a pretty large reduction. They will still happen. And again, the pre-designed ones still happen just as often. Last one, and this one's kind of a big one, but I think players are going to like this one. Item drops are now more likely to appear in earlier PvE stages. So what that means is typically you had your items and they would be randomly distributed amongst Krugs, Wolves, and Raptors. What we did is they are now much more likely to be pushed into the Krugs and Wolves camp. So the way you'll notice this is that Raptors are very less likely to give you a bunch of items. And so if you've been watching my stream, what you've seen is like Raptors are usually only giving me 1, maybe 2 items if I'm lucky. Because again, it's all kind of shoved forward. So this should allow you to use your items earlier and commit to stuff earlier when you want to and be more flexible. So those are the system changes. Let's talk about the trait changes. There are 4 trait changes. Mech is getting another nerf. Yes, Mech continues to get nerfs because Mech continues to be strong. Kind of like we already did with the HP, the AD also scales really well with star level. A level 8 Mech has like 400 AD. It's actually kind of bonkers. So what we did is we changed it to kind of match the HP, actually, where it's got a base AD, and then it now takes 45% of the pilot's AD. Now, everyone's saying Mech super dead. Literally, the game I was just streaming was won by a Mech with the nerfs. I actually don't think this kills it at all. I think this makes it a little weaker. I think Kyun and Milk will still be just fine. So, Infiltrator. Big change here. Infiltrator will now always jump, no matter what. So, even if you put Echo in melee range, still going to jump. So this gets rid of all the confusion with all the different, like, why didn't my guy jump? Why, So Infiltrators always jump. No, the Mech will not jump. Okay, Rebel. This is probably the riskiest buff of all of them, but according to the data, Rebel is still underperforming pretty significantly. So we are doing the lightest touch we can on Rebel to give Rebel a slight damage buff. I do think this is a bit risky, because certainly if you can nail an early Rebel comp with a perfect Jinx, it's really strong. But this should help with its consistency a bit. So, and then lastly, Space Pirate. Space Pirate continues to need a buff. So now if you do hit 4 Space Pirate, you get an even higher chance to drop an item. So that's it on the trait side. And yeah, there is a chance that Rebel goes wrong. We'll see. If so, we'll deal with it. But this is probably the riskiest change in the whole patch. All right, 1 cost champ changes. Now, I want to be clear on this, because obviously there's going to be people who will be like, woo, Poppy nerfs, yay! Poppy and Xayah comps were actually not that out of line. They're strong, for sure. Clearly, perception is through the roof. So the nerfs are actually fairly light. Our goal is not to kill the comp. We do want Poppy to still be a viable comp. The goal is to bring it a little bit down in relative power. So in the case of Poppy, you'll notice at 1 star, no nerf. At 2 star, there is a 25 damage nerf and a 50 shield nerf. And at 3 star is definitely where it gets hit the hardest. But it's a 50 damage nerf and a 100 shield. Now remember, this is base. So if, let's say, you're running 6 Sorcerer and have a death cap on it, that means it probably went from 1,500 to 1,200. So 20% nerf. I think Poppy will still be just fine playable, but probably won't be like the highest elo kind of comp. So now, interestingly enough, Twisted Fate was actually the bigger outlier here. Twisted Fate, honestly, probably shouldn't have let this buff go through last patch, so we're pulling back on it. But 3-star Twisted Fate is now no longer double the damage almost. So it goes from 550 to 450. There you go. Those are the 2 biggest things that'll nerf the Candyland comp. Xayah, same thing. Honestly, we debated this buff for a long time. There were definitely people on the team that were like, we don't need to do this. But we decided to do a 5 AD nerf on Xayah. This should pull down the Shredder comp just a bit. Pikachu comp is unaffected by this. Not that anyone was really running that at high level anyway. But Xayah does drop down a little bit. And remember, that's 5 AD at level 1, which is 9 AD at level 2, which is 18 AD at level 3. So, like, it definitely scales. Lastly is Ziggs. Ziggs was underperforming by a significant margin, pretty much the worst 1 cost in the game. And Ziggs is actually really important to the meta, because if everyone's running 2 Vanguard, you kind of want some good magic damage early to tear through those Vanguards. And Ziggs is supposed to be that. So we're buffing Ziggs back to his 40 mana. So this should allow Ziggs to be a nice counter to early 2 Vanguard comps. All right, 2 costs. A lot of changes here. Just kidding, only 1. Yasuo. Yasuo is getting a pretty big buff to compensate for his change in paradigm last time. We do think the change in paradigm has been healthy. It's just left him a bit weak. So now he gets 100 HP, which is a pretty big buff. And his mana goes down a little bit. And yes, so you're noticing now with Rebel, that's Ziggs buff, Yasuo buff, and the Rebel trait buff. So Rebels could be in a good spot. We'll see how that goes. All right, 3 costs. Karma has been underperforming for a bit. She's only really used in Darkstar. And honestly, people haven't been as excited to use her as that 4th item slot like we wanted. So we're giving her some bonus power back into her attack speed. So now when she shields somebody, they get even more attack speed. This should hopefully make using Karma actually exciting even outside of Darkstar. So that's good. And then Syndra. Syndra, ever since the mana nerf that we did on the B patch in 10.8, has been underperforming by a lot. Basically, she just isn't that exciting. Most of the time, you either run Mana Printer or put items elsewhere. It's like you almost never itemize Syndra. So, Syndra gets to get some spell power. She is a 3 cost. She is supposed to be strong. Obviously, we're not going to pull back on the mana, because that'll just put us back in the problem we were in before. So she gets some spell damage. So her spell hits harder, and will hopefully be able to one-shot things a little sooner. So, all right, 4 cost. Kale. So unlike the graphic at the beginning, it was wrong. It's just a nerf, and it is just 3-star. So 3-star is getting a pretty big nerf from 750 to 600. But this is specifically because 3-star Kale was way above the other 3-star forecasts in terms of performance. So this is to try to bring her down to the other 3-star forecasts in performance. So, and I know people are going to be like, but I've lost with Kale before. And it's like, yes, it's still possible to lose, but she was definitely overperforming. Vel'Koz gets a buff. Now you might be going, but wait, Laser Printer is so good. Why does Vel'Koz get a buff? Well, we'll talk about Printer later. Printer is getting nerfed, and because Printer is getting nerfed, we still want Void to be playable, and so Vel'Koz is getting a buff. It's just a very slight buff, 25 at 1, 50 at 2, but this should make Vel'Koz a little more threatening. And lastly is Wukong. I think this buff is great. Honestly, I think it makes him real strong. But now, when he spins around jumping from target to target, instead of doing it randomly, which sometimes caused him to avoid entire groups and go a completely different way, instead, he'll go to the closest enemy. So he'll start ping-ponging from enemy to enemy. I think this is a really nice quality of life buff. I think this makes Wukong a lot better. Next up would be the 5 cost changes. Guess what? There aren't any. So let's talk about items. This is probably the biggest one. Chalice of Harmony is a really weird item in that if you have 1 on a character, it's pretty bad. It's actually like really bad. If you have 2 on a character, it starts to be okay. If you have 2 plus a Seraph or 2 or 3, it's insane. It all of a sudden turns comps into Exodia comps. It's ridiculous. The item is not in a good spot for the game. I can tell you now it is probably the first item to go away at the mid-set expansion. But in the meantime, again, we don't want to change the meta dramatically, so we still want you to be able to build printers, but they did need to come down in power. So what we did was we nerfed the mana from 10 to 8. So what this means is, let's say you're running a Sona with Seraph's Chalice. That is now 36 mana instead of 40, which means Sona has to auto-attack once. That will slow down Sona. If you run 3 Chalices, that's 24. That's actually bad. That means Sona has to auto-attack twice. So that's a pretty big nerf there. You can run Seraph's Chalice. That'll still be 40. But then you're only giving your team 8 mana per cast, which isn't that crazy. So we think this makes this less of an Exodia comp. But as you saw, I did win with this earlier today. So like it still works. It's just nerfed. Deathblade. Deathblade has been underperforming. If you want to know how the math works out on Deathblade, like let's say you build Deathblade on Aurelia, as soon as you hit 2 stacks, it's better than IE. The problem is, by the time you hit 2 stacks, the fight's probably already over, and you probably shouldn't have done it anyway. So now we're going to make it so it starts with 1 stack, which means as soon as you get 1 more stack, it's better than IE. But you do need to get that stack. So kind of like Jinx, if you can pull it off, it's really strong now. The other fun thing, and this is just a quality of life thing, is that instead of showing the number of stacks, like 2, 3, 4, it actually shows how much AD you're getting now. So someone saw it on stream earlier where it said 150. That means you're getting 150 AD from Deathblade. And so it kind of makes it easier to appreciate. And then lastly, we have Morellonomicon and Red Buff being nerfed again. This is specifically to deal with Blaster Brawler early game power, is why this is the Red Buff nerf. Red Buff early game is insanely good. Insanely good. So we're trying to pull that down just a little bit. And again, all of these changes are supposed to be not meta warping. So like our expectation is that Blaster Brawler will still probably be good, still probably be the best staple comp, but this should bring it down in power just a little bit. All right, and then lastly we have the bug fixes, and I think there's some good ones here you guys are going to appreciate. Guardian Angel no longer strips certain combat enhancing effects when it procs, like Shaco's powered up attack, Jin's fourth shot. So now when you res and you're like, where's my fourth shot? That'll be fixed. Certain PvE enemies will no longer contort into balls and float around when they defeat you in combat. Most of you probably never saw this, but it was really awkward. Xerath now properly fires a visual missile when performing a critical auto attack. Sweet. Miss Fortune will no longer occasionally have her larger cone upgrade when the player who owns her hasn't purchased that upgrade. So that MF bug is fixed. Fixed an issue where some players would arrive late to the first carousel. I know that bug bothered a lot of people sometimes, so hopefully that is fixed. Hooray! Improved the detection of click and drag to make it easier to move characters and items around the board. So hopefully that gets fixed as well. And then the last one, and probably the most exciting for a lot of people here, while viewing your board from the carousel, equipped items are visible again. Woohoo! That's a good one. So, that's it for patch 10.10. As I mentioned, it's a small patch. It is meant to bring the meta a little tighter. It is not meant to wildly warp the meta. Rebels is probably the riskiest thing of everything. But otherwise, you'll probably still be seeing Blaster Brawler. You'll still be some Shredder. You'll still see everything else. And hopefully you'll see some other stuff as well. So, and as always, these are subject to change. Hypothetically, if we saw new data that told us to change it on Monday, we could still change it. So the patch notes are your best official way to get that. That's going to do it for this patch rundown. Hopefully you guys enjoy patch 10.10 and are looking forward to the mid-set expansion in 10.12. Otherwise, take it easy.